The dust-choked cowboy standing in the mercantile doorway had exactly $1.17 to his name when Clara Owens walked straight up to him and asked, "Will you accompany me to the harvest dance next Saturday?" And in that moment, Harrison Zimmerman's entire careful world tilted sideways like a wagon with a broken axle. He blinked at her through the late afternoon light filtering into Mr. Peterson's store, certain the son had finally cooked his brain after 10 hours mending fence posts in the merciless California heat. Clara Owens was not the sort of girl who asked men to dances. Clara Owens was the sort of girl men spent months working up courage to approach, only to lose their nerve at the last second and shuffle away defeated. She stood there in a pale blue cotton dress, her dark hair pinned up in a way that suggested she had better things to do than fuss with elaborate styles, and her brown eyes looked directly into his with an expectation that made his throat go dry. "Madam," he managed, his voice cracking like he was 15 instead of 23. "The harvest dance," she repeated patiently. "Next Saturday evening at the community hall. I'm asking if you'll escort me." Harrison glanced behind him to see if perhaps some other, more suitable man stood there. The doorway remained empty except for the dust motes dancing in the amber light. He looked back at Clara, trying to organize his thoughts into something resembling coherent speech. "Miss Owens, I think maybe you have me confused with someone else." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You're Harrison Zimmerman. You work at the Double Creek Ranch. You've been in Redding, California for 8 months now, and in all that time I've never once seen you at a dance or a social or anywhere except working or buying supplies. So no, I don't have you confused with anyone." The accuracy of her observation rattled him more than the initial question. He had been careful to keep to himself, to avoid situations where his worn clothes and empty pockets would stand in sharp contrast to the other young men in town. The memory of another girl, another town, another humiliation rose up like bile in his throat. Lydia Foster's father had made certain everyone at that Tennessee church social knew exactly how unsuitable Harrison was, how a man without prospects had no business courting a respectable girl. The shame of being publicly dismissed as not good enough had followed him across half the country. "I appreciate the offer, Miss Owens," he said carefully, "but I don't think your father would approve." "My father doesn't get to decide who I spend time with," Clara said, and there was steel beneath the pleasant tone. "I'm asking you, Harrison, not him. Will you take me to the dance or not?" He should say no. Every ounce of self-preservation he possessed screamed at him to politely decline and walk away. But Clara stood there waiting, and something in her directness, her refusal to play the coy games other girls seemed to favor, made him want to be brave enough to say yes. The problem remained starkly mathematical. $1.17, no decent clothes. No way to show up at the community harvest dance looking like anything other than what he was. A down-on-his-luck drifter who slept in the ranch bunkhouse and owned exactly 2 shirts, both of which had been patched more times than he could count. "I'd be honored, Miss Owens," he heard himself say and watched her face light up with genuine pleasure. "But I should be honest with you. I'm not exactly fixed for a fancy occasion." Clara waved a dismissive hand. "It's a harvest dance, not a governor's ball. Nobody's expecting tailcoats and top hats. Just show up clean and on time. I'll meet you at 7 o'clock in front of the hall." She left before he could explain further, sweeping out of the mercantile with the confidence of someone who had never been told she wasn't good enough. Harrison stood there holding his small bag of tobacco and coffee, the luxuries he had been about to purchase with his meager funds, and felt the full weight of his foolish acceptance settle on his shoulders. Old Jacob Peterson looked up from behind the counter with knowing eyes. "That Clara Owens is something else, ain't she?" "Something else," Harrison agreed faintly. "Her daddy owns the Owens Ranch, one of the biggest spreads in the county. Made his money in cattle, made more in land speculation when the railroad came through." Jacob rang up Harrison's purchases with practiced efficiency. Got himself a fine house up on the hill and expectations to match. Harrison counted out his coins slowly. "I'm aware. Also aware he's been trying to match Clara with Daniel Morrison. The Morrison boy stands to inherit considerable property, banking interests too." "I appreciate the information, Mr. Peterson." Harrison picked up his purchases, suddenly eager to be anywhere else. "Wasn't trying to discourage you, son." Jacob's weathered face creased into something that might have been approval. "Just laying out the landscape. Clara's got a mind of her own, always has. When she was 10 years old, she informed her daddy she'd be learning to manage the ranch accounts whether he thought it proper for a girl or not. Guess who does the ranch books now?" Despite everything, Harrison felt a smile tug at his mouth. "I'll keep that in mind." He walked back toward the Double Creek Ranch, as the sun began its descent toward the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if he wasn't busy calculating impossible mathematics. $1.17 minus 43 cents for tobacco and coffee left 74 cents. Not enough for anything resembling dance-appropriate clothing. His Sunday shirt had a tear in the shoulder he had mended with uneven stitches, and his trousers bore the permanent stains of years of hard work. The bunkhouse sat low and weathered at the edge of the ranch property, home to 6 hired hands who worked cattle and horses for wages that barely covered necessities. Harrison's corner held his bedroll, a wooden crate that served as a table, and a trunk containing everything he owned in the world. He sat on the edge of his bunk and stared at those possessions, trying to see some solution that stubbornly refused to appear. "You look like a man with troubles," observed Tom Fletcher, who occupied the bunk nearest the door. Tom was pushing 50, with the lined face of someone who had spent his entire life outdoors, and the perpetual good humor of someone who had made peace with modest circumstances. Harrison explained the situation in brief, economical sentences, leaving out the parts about old humiliations and the sick certainty that he was setting himself up for another public failure. Tom listened without interruption, then let out a long, low whistle. "Clara Owens asked you herself." "That's bold." "That's insane," Harrison corrected. "What was she thinking?" "Maybe she was thinking you're a decent man who works hard and treats people right." Tom swung his legs off his bunk. "Maybe she's tired of the kind of men who measure worth in dollars and property deeds." "That's a nice thought, Tom, but it doesn't solve my immediate problem. I can't show up to escort the daughter of one of the richest men in the county looking like I just crawled out of a cattle pen." Tom scratched his jaw thoughtfully. "How much money you got left?" 74 cents. "That's plenty." Harrison stared at him. "Plenty for what, exactly?" "Come with me Saturday morning. I know a place." Saturday morning arrived with the kind of cruel sunshine that made everything look harsh and unforgiving. Harrison had barely slept, his mind churning through scenarios where Clara's father had him thrown out of the dance, or worse, where Clara herself realized her mistake and quietly disappeared, leaving him standing alone while the whole town watched. He had worked himself into such a state of anxious misery that Tom had to physically drag him away from his half-hearted attempt at mucking out stalls. "You're going to make yourself sick," Tom said firmly. "We're going to town." They rode in on Tom's aging mare, Harrison behind and clutching his 74 cents like it might multiply through sheer force of will. Reading's Main Street bustled with Saturday activity. Families doing their weekly shopping, men conducting business outside the bank, women moving between the dry goods store and the milliner's shop. Tom guided them past the respectable establishments to a narrow building near the edge of town that Harrison had never paid much attention to before. The sign above the door read, "Second Chances," in faded paint, and through the window Harrison could see racks of clothing in various states of wear. A second-hand shop. His pride bristled immediately at the thought, but Tom was already dismounting and tying up the horse. "I know what you're thinking," Tom said, "but there's no shame in buying what you can afford. Every man in this town has done it at one time or another, they just don't advertise the fact." The shop interior smelled of mothballs and old wool, but it was clean and organized with surprising care. The proprietor, a thin woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, looked up from her mending. "Tom Fletcher, as I live and breathe. What brings you to my establishment?" "Morning, Mrs. Hartwell. My friend here needs a suit suitable for tonight's dance, and he's got 74 cents to spend." Mrs. Hartwell's sharp eyes fixed on Harrison with an intensity that made him want to squirm. She set down her needle and walked around him in a slow circle, assessing. "You're a 29 waist and about a 16.5 collar, I'd guess. Not too broad in the shoulders. Stand up straight, young man, slouching won't help anything." Harrison straightened automatically, feeling like a child being inspected by a stern schoolteacher. Mrs. Hartwell disappeared into the back of the shop and returned with an armful of dark fabric. "Try this." The suit was black wool, well worn but clean, with only minor signs of its previous life visible in the slight fading at the elbows and knees. Harrison took it to the small curtained area Mrs. Hartwell indicated and changed with trembling fingers. The trousers fit reasonably well, perhaps a touch loose in the waist, but nothing a belt couldn't manage. The jacket settled across his shoulders like it had been waiting for him, the sleeves just long enough to cover his wrists. He emerged from behind the curtain feeling absurdly self-conscious. Tom let out an approving sound. Mrs. Hartwell circled him again, tugging here and there, examining the fit with a critical eye. "The previous owner was a clerk who moved to Sacramento last year," she said. "Paid good money for this suit and wore it perhaps a dozen times. It'll do nicely." "How much?" Harrison asked, afraid to hope. 74 cents. He stared at her. "Madam, this suit is worth more than that." Mrs. Hartwell's stern expression softened just slightly. "Young man, I decide what my merchandise is worth, not you. 74 cents, and you'll take it and be grateful, and perhaps someday when you have more than pocket change to your name, you'll remember that people need help sometimes." Harrison's throat felt tight. He counted out his remaining coins into her outstretched palm, every last cent he possessed in the world, and received in return a suit that transformed him from a dusty ranch hand into someone who might, just possibly, be worthy of escorting Clara Owens to a dance. "Thank you," he managed. "I mean it, madam, thank you. Just treat that girl right," Mrs. Hartwell said briskly. "I've known Clara since she was born, and she's got more sense in her little finger than most people have in their entire heads. If she chose you, there's a reason." The afternoon stretched endless and terrible. Harrison bathed in the creek behind the bunkhouse, scrubbing away layers of grime and anxiety with equal vigor. He shaved with a borrowed razor, nicking himself twice in his nervousness. He combed his dark hair until it lay flat and neat, then combed it again because his hands needed something to do. Tom watched these preparations with poorly concealed amusement. "You're going to wear yourself out before you even get to the dance. What if I step on her feet? What if I can't remember the steps? What if her father makes a scene? What if you just try to enjoy yourself?" Tom suggested. Clara clearly sees something in you worth her time. Maybe trust her judgment." Harrison wanted to explain that trusting in good things felt dangerous, that every time he had allowed himself to hope for something better, life had found ways to prove him wrong. But the words stuck in his throat, tangled up with old shame and newer fear, so he just nodded and continued his anxious preparations. The sun finally began its evening descent, and Harrison dressed in his clean suit with hands that shook slightly. The fabric felt foreign against his skin, so different from his usual rough work clothes that he barely recognized his own reflection in Tom's shaving mirror. He looked respectable. He looked like someone who might belong at a community dance. The illusion was fragile, but it was there. "You'll do fine," Tom said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Now go on before you think yourself into paralysis." The walk into Reading took 20 minutes, and Harrison spent every one of them rehearsing things to say that didn't sound idiotic. The community hall glowed with lamplight as he approached, and he could already hear music drifting from the open windows. Other couples and families moved toward the entrance, dressed in their best clothes, laughing and calling greetings to one another. Harrison's steps slowed as the familiar weight of not belonging settled on his shoulders. Then he saw Clara. She stood at the base of the hall steps, illuminated by the warm light spilling from inside, wearing a dress the color of deep cream with small flowers embroidered at the collar and cuffs. Her dark hair had been arranged in some complicated style he couldn't name, and she held a small beaded purse in both hands. But what struck him most was her face when she spotted him approaching. She smiled, genuine and bright, and moved to meet him halfway. "Harrison," she said, and his name sounded like something valuable in her voice. "You look very handsome." He felt heat rise in his face. "You look beautiful, Miss Owens." "Clara," she corrected gently. "If we're attending a dance together, you should probably call me Clara." "Clara," he repeated, and felt something in his chest loosen slightly at the intimacy of her first name. "I should tell you, I'm not much of a dancer. Fair warning before we go in there." She looped her arm through his with easy confidence. "Then we'll figure it out together. Come on. I hear the music starting." The community hall had been decorated with autumn harvest themes, corn stalks and pumpkins arranged artfully around the room, strings of colored paper garlands hanging from the rafters. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a small group of musicians occupied the far corner, already launching into a lively reel. The space filled with people Harrison recognized from town, ranchers and shopkeepers and their families, all dressed in their finest and ready to celebrate the successful harvest season. He felt eyes turn toward them as they entered, felt the weight of curious gazes assessing him and finding him wanting. Or perhaps that was just his own certainty of inadequacy projected outward. Clara seemed entirely unbothered by the attention, guiding him through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping occasionally to greet acquaintances. "Clara, darling." A woman who shared Clara's dark eyes and elegant bearing approached with outstretched hands. "Don't you look lovely?" "And who's your escort?" "Mother, this is Harrison Zimmerman. He works at the Double Creek Ranch. Harrison, my mother, Margaret Owens." Harrison executed what he hoped was an acceptable bow. "Pleased to meet you, madam." Margaret Owens studied him with eyes that were kind but assessing. "Zimmerman." "I don't believe we've met before." "No, madam. I've only been in Reading since January. From back east originally. I detect a bit of Tennessee in your voice." Harrison blinked, surprised. "Yes, madam, just outside Nashville. I grew up in Virginia myself." "It's nice to hear a touch of home now and then." She patted Clara's arm. "You two enjoy the dance. Your father is somewhere around here, Clara. He'll want to say hello." The pleasant tone didn't quite mask what felt like a warning. Clara's expression tightened almost imperceptibly before smoothing back into pleasantness. "I'm sure we'll find him. Excuse us, Mother." She steered Harrison toward the refreshment table with slightly more force than necessary. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" "Your mother seems nice," Harrison offered. "She is nice. She's also completely under my father's thumb when it comes to anything important." Clara accepted 2 cups of punch from the table and handed one to Harrison. "But let's not waste the evening worrying about him. Tell me something about yourself that isn't work-related." Harrison's mind went blank. Every thought he had seemed to revolve around cattle and fence mending and the endless cycle of ranch work. "I don't know that there's much else to tell. Work takes up most of the time." "There has to be something." Clara sipped her punch, waiting. "What did you do before you came to California? What made you leave Tennessee?" The question touched too close to wounds he wasn't ready to expose. "Just wanted to see more of the country, I guess." California seemed as good a destination as any. Clara studied him over the rim of her cup, and Harrison had the uncomfortable feeling she could see straight through his evasion. But she didn't push, just nodded and said, "I've lived in Redding my whole life. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just go somewhere entirely new, start fresh where nobody knows you." "It's not as freeing as you might think," Harrison said before he could stop himself. "The things you're running from tend to follow along inside your head." "Are you running from something?" The question was gentle, but it still made him flinch. Before he could formulate an answer that was neither a lie nor the whole painful truth, a new voice interrupted. "Clara, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." The man approaching was everything Harrison was not. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy hair carefully pomaded and clothing that spoke of real money, not second-hand charity. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told he wasn't good enough, and his smile held easy assumption that he would be welcomed. Clara's expression went carefully neutral. "Daniel, good evening. You look stunning, as always." Daniel's eyes flicked to Harrison briefly, dismissively before returning to Clara. "I was hoping you'd save me a dance. Perhaps the next waltz." "I'm here with Harrison," Clara said, her voice pleasant but firm. "Harrison Zimmerman, this is Daniel Morrison." Harrison nodded acknowledgement, trying not to feel like a mongrel dog being compared to a thoroughbred horse. Daniel's handshake was perfunctory, his attention already sliding back to Clara. Of course. I'm sure Harrison won't mind sparing you for one dance. After all, we've known each other since childhood." The assumption in his tone made it clear he expected agreement. "Actually, I would mind," Clara said coolly. "I asked Harrison to escort me this evening, and I intend to dance with him, not with every man who asks. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe the music is starting again." She set down her punch cup and took Harrison's hand, leading him toward the dance floor before Daniel could respond. Harrison caught a glimpse of the other man's face, surprise giving way to poorly concealed irritation, before Clara pulled his attention forward. "I apologize for that," she said quietly as they took their positions for a Virginia reel. "Daniel has difficulty understanding that his expectations aren't my obligations. He seems very interested in you." Harrison tried to keep his voice neutral. "His father and mine are business associates. They've had some notion of an eventual match since we were children." Clara's hand settled on his shoulder as the music began. "What they never bothered to consider was whether I had any interest in Daniel Morrison, which I don't." The dance began before Harrison could fully process that statement. He had learned basic reels and squares years ago at community gatherings back in Tennessee, but that felt like another lifetime. His feet remembered the patterns even as his mind scrambled to keep up. Clara moved with effortless grace, guiding him through the steps when he faltered, smiling encouragement when he managed a full sequence without stepping on her toes. Around them other couples whirled and turned, the dance creating temporary partnerships and separations as the pattern required. Harrison caught glimpses of Daniel Morrison standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching them with an expression that wasn't quite a scowl but wasn't friendly either. He also noticed, with growing unease, an older man beside Daniel. The man's face bore enough resemblance to Clara's that Harrison could guess his identity even before the dance brought them close enough for Clara to confirm it. "That's my father," she murmured as they passed. "Richard Owens. Try not to look terrified." "Failing that already," Harrison muttered, and was rewarded with her laugh. The dance ended with a flourish, leaving Harrison slightly breathless and absurdly pleased that he had managed not to humiliate himself completely. Clara's eyes sparkled with genuine enjoyment as she applauded along with the rest of the dancers. "You're better than you claimed," she said, "though I suspect you understated your abilities to manage expectations." "I genuinely haven't danced in years," Harrison protested. "You made it easy by knowing what you were doing, Clara." The voice came from behind them, authoritative and not particularly warm. "A word, please." Richard Owens stood with the bearing of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He was perhaps 55, with silver threading through dark hair and the weathered skin of someone who had built their fortune through hard work before settling into management. His suit probably cost more than Harrison would earn in a year, and his eyes assessed Harrison with the same calculation a buyer might use when evaluating questionable livestock. "Father." Clara's voice remained pleasant, but Harrison felt her stiffen beside him. "Are you enjoying the dance?" "I'd enjoy it more if I understood what my daughter was thinking." Richard's gaze finally left Harrison to fix on Clara. "Daniel Morrison tells me you refuse to dance with him." "I explained to Daniel that I'm here with Harrison this evening. It seemed rude to abandon my escort." "Your escort?" Richard made the word sound faintly ridiculous. "Clara, honey, Daniel's family has been good to us. It wouldn't hurt you to be polite." "I was perfectly polite. I was also honest." Clara's chin lifted in what Harrison was beginning to recognize as her stubborn expression. "Father, this is Harrison Zimmerman. He works at the Double Creek Ranch." "Harrison, my father, Richard Owens." Harrison extended his hand, forcing himself to meet the older man's eyes despite every instinct that screamed at him to look away. "Mr. Owens, pleasure to meet you, sir." Richard's handshake was brief, businesslike, and about as warm as a winter creek. "Zimmerman, can't say I'm familiar with the name." "I only moved to the area this year, sir." "Moved from where?" "Tennessee, originally. I've been working my way west for a few years now." "Working your way west?" Richard repeated the phrase as if examining it for hidden meaning. "And what is it you do at the Double Creek Ranch?" "General ranch hand, sir. Cattle work mostly, some horse breaking, maintenance, whatever needs doing." The assessment in Richard's eyes was not kind. Harrison could see the man calculating worth and finding it severely wanting. He had seen that look before in Tennessee in the eyes of Lydia Foster's father. The shame he had carried across half the country rose up fresh and burning. "I see." Richard turned back to Clara. "Sweetheart, might I speak with you privately for a moment? Anything you need to say can be said in front of Harrison." Clara's voice held steel now, the pleasant facade dropping away. "Fine." Richard's jaw tightened. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not amusing." "Daniel Morrison is a good man from a good family with excellent prospects. This boy is a drifter who works for wages and probably doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. I won't stand by and watch you throw away your future for some passing fancy." The words landed like physical blows. Harrison felt his face burn with humiliation, Every fear confirmed, every old wound torn open. He should have known better. He should have said no when Clara first asked. He should have saved himself this public demonstration that men like Richard Owens were absolutely correct in their assessment of men like him. That's enough. Clara's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts with unexpected force. Harrison, I need you to listen to me very carefully. My father doesn't speak for me. His opinion of you means nothing compared to my own. Do you understand? Harrison couldn't quite meet her eyes. Miss Owens, Clara, it's all right. Your father's not wrong. I shouldn't have presumed. Presumed what? That you deserve to attend a community dance. That you're worthy of basic human respect. Clara's anger wasn't directed at him, but it burned in her voice nonetheless. You didn't presume anything, Harrison. I asked you. I chose you. And I'm not changing my mind because my father has an outdated notion of what makes a man valuable. Clara, be reasonable, Richard began. I am being reasonable. You're the one making a scene at a community dance. Clara took Harrison's hand firmly. Come on, let's get some air. She led him outside before he could protest, away from the music and the watching eyes and Richard Owens's disappointed disapproval. The night air hit cool against Harrison's burning face. He pulled free of Clara's grip and walked a few paces away, trying to steady his breathing, trying to collect the pieces of his shattered composure. I'm sorry, Clara said quietly behind him. My father can be difficult when he doesn't get his way. He's trying to protect you. Harrison's voice came out rough. Can't fault him for that. Protect me from what? From you. She moved into his line of sight, forcing him to look at her. Harrison, what exactly do you think you are? The question was so direct it startled him into honesty. Not good enough for you. That's the truth, Clara. Your father sees it, Daniel Morrison sees it, hell, I see it. I don't know why you don't. Because I measure men differently than they do. Clara's eyes searched his face. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? Harrison wanted to say no, wanted to walk away and save them both the trouble of prolonging this disaster. But something in her expression held him in place. I see a man who's been in town for 8 months and has never once caused trouble, never gotten drunk and rowdy at the saloon, never treated anyone poorly, Clara said. I see someone who works hard without complaining, who's polite to everyone from the bank president to the shop clerks. I see someone who, when asked to escort me to a dance, showed up clean and respectful in a suit that I'm guessing cost you more than you could easily afford. Harrison flinched. She had noticed. Of course she had noticed. I did some asking around about you, Clara continued. Mr. Peterson at the Mercantile says you're honest, always pay your debts. Tom Fletcher says you're the hardest worker at the Double Creek Ranch and the first to help when someone needs it. Even Mrs. Hartwell mentioned that you came into her shop today. You talked to Mrs. Hartwell. Harrison felt his face grow hot again. She was in the dry goods store this afternoon, happened to mention a young man who spent his last money on a second-hand suit so he could properly escort a girl to a dance. Clara's voice softened. She thought it was the most romantic thing she'd seen in years. Harrison laughed, a short, bitter sound. Romantic, right? I'm sure that's exactly what your father thinks. I don't care what my father thinks. Clara stepped closer. Harrison, why do you believe you're not good enough? The question touched the wound he had been protecting, the old humiliation he never talked about. But Clara stood there waiting with patient eyes, and something about the evening, about having his worst fears confirmed and still somehow having her choose to stand beside him, loosened his tongue. There was a girl back in Tennessee, he said quietly. Lydia Foster. Her father owned the bank in our town. I was working as a stable hand, saving money, trying to build something. I thought Lydia and I had an understanding. I asked her father's permission to court her properly. Clara waited, not interrupting, just listening. He laughed at me. The memory still stung 3 years later. Then he called a bunch of people over at the church social we were at, and made sure everyone heard him explain that his daughter would never be allowed to associate with a stable boy with no prospects and no family name. Lydia just stood there, didn't say a word in my defense. That was when I realized how foolish I'd been. "She sounds like a coward," Clara said flatly. Harrison blinked at her. "What? She was a coward. She let her father humiliate you publicly rather than stand up for what she wanted, assuming she wanted you at all." Clara's jaw set stubbornly. "I'm not Lydia Foster, Harrison, and you're not that boy working in a stable anymore. You're a man who crossed half the country to build a new life, who works hard and treats people with respect, who spent his last dollar to honor a commitment to me. Those things matter. Those things are worth more than Daniel Morrison's inheritance and family connections. Your father doesn't think so. My father is wrong." Clara reached out and took his hand. "Harrison, I know we barely know each other. I know this is all moving faster than might be wise. But I need you to understand something. I didn't ask you to this dance on a whim or to make some point to my father. I asked you because I've been watching you for months, and everything I've seen tells me you're exactly the kind of man worth knowing better." Her hand felt warm in his, and Harrison realized with a start that she was trembling slightly. Clara Owens, who had walked into a mercantile and asked him to a dance with complete confidence, who had stood up to her father without flinching, was nervous now. That vulnerability did something to him, shifted something in his chest that had been tight and painful. "I don't have anything to offer you," he said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had held earlier. "No property, no prospects, nothing but what I can earn with my hands." "That's not nothing." Clara squeezed his hand. "Can I tell you a secret? Daniel Morrison has property and prospects and family money, and he's also boring as dirt and twice as dense. He's never had an original thought in his life, never worked for anything, never had to prove himself. His father owns half the bank, and Daniel coasts on that without ever bothering to be interesting or kind or anything except entitled." Despite everything, Harrison felt a smile tug at his mouth. "You really don't like him much, do you?" "I really don't," Clara confirmed. "Whereas you spent your last money on a clean suit just to honor a commitment to me. Do you understand how rare that is? How much that tells me about who you are?" Harrison did understand, suddenly and completely. She wasn't seeing him through the lens of what he lacked. She was seeing him as he actually was, measuring him by his character and finding him worthy. The realization felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. "So what now?" he asked. "Your father's pretty clear about his opinion. Now we go back inside and finish our dance." Clara smiled up at him, and in that moment she looked fierce and beautiful and completely certain. "And if my father has a problem with it, he can take it up with me tomorrow. But tonight I'm dancing with the man I chose. Are you with me?" Harrison thought about walking away. He thought about the safe choice, the careful choice, the choice that would protect him from further humiliation. Then he thought about Clara standing in front of her father defending him, about her hand trembling in his, about the way she looked at him like he was worth something precious. "I'm with you," he said, and meant it with everything he had. They walked back into the dance hall together, and if people stared, Harrison tried not to notice. Clara kept her hand in his, a statement of solidarity that meant more than she probably realized. The music had shifted to a slower waltz, couples turning in gentle circles around the floor. Clara led him back onto the dance floor without hesitation. Harrison's hands found their proper positions, one at her waist, the other clasping hers, and they fell into the rhythm of the waltz. This dance was easier somehow, more intimate, just the two of them moving together while the room spun around them. "You're full of surprises," Clara murmured as they turned. "You waltz better than you claimed." "My mother insisted on proper manners," Harrison said. Dancing lessons fell under that category. "Where is your mother now?" "Died when I was 16. Fever took her one winter. My father followed a year later. Broken heart, the doctor said, but I think it was just pneumonia." The old grief had dulled to an ache. "That's when I started working my way west. Nothing keeping me in Tennessee anymore." Clara's eyes held sympathy without pity. "I'm sorry, that must have been hard." "It was. But it also meant I got to see the country, learn different skills, meet different people." Harrison spun her gently. "Ended up in California. Could be worse places to land. Could be better places than a bunkhouse at the Double Creek Ranch, though. It's honest work and honest pay. That's more than some people get." They danced in comfortable silence for a few moments, the music carrying them through turns and steps. Harrison found himself relaxing despite the evening's earlier tension, despite knowing Richard Owens and Daniel Morrison were probably watching from the sidelines with disapproval. Clara felt right in his arms, fitting perfectly, moving with him like they had been dancing together for years instead of hours. "Can I ask you something?" Clara's voice pulled him back to the present. "Of course." "What do you want, Harrison? Long term, I mean." If you could have any future, what would it look like? The question surprised him. Nobody had asked him that in years, maybe ever. He thought about it seriously, trying to find words for dreams he barely admitted to himself. "A place of my own someday," he said slowly. "Nothing fancy, just enough land for horses. I'm good with horses, always have been. Could train them, breed them maybe. Build something that's mine that I made with my own hands." He hesitated, then added, "Someone to share it with. Not like Lydia, someone real. Someone who sees me as I am and thinks that's enough." "That sounds like a good future," Clara said quietly. "Attainable too, with enough time and work." "You think so? I know so. Land in California isn't as expensive as people think, especially if you're willing to work for it. And you're clearly not afraid of work." She met his eyes. "The other part might be easier than you think too." The implication in her words made his heart stutter. Before he could respond, the music ended, and the moment broke into applause and movement as couples left the floor or reformed for the next dance. Clara's mother appeared at their side, smiling pleasantly, but with a tension around her eyes that suggested she knew about the earlier confrontation. "Clara, darling, would you mind helping me with something in the kitchen? Just for a moment." Margaret's tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. Clara squeezed Harrison's hand. "I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere." He watched her follow her mother toward the back of the hall, then found himself standing alone in the crowd, suddenly very aware that he didn't quite belong. A few people nodded politely, but most avoided his eyes, made uncomfortable by Richard Owens's earlier scene or simply by his obviously second-hand suit and work-roughened hands. "She's just being kind to you, you know." Daniel Morrison's voice came from behind him, smug and certain. "Clara has a soft heart. She likes to make people feel included." Harrison turned slowly. "Is there something I can help you with, Morrison? Just offering some friendly advice." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Clara's father is a powerful man in this county. He has expectations for his daughter's future, and they don't include a drifter with nothing to his name. You're embarrassing yourself and putting Clara in an awkward position." "Clara seems pretty capable of deciding what position she wants to be in," Harrison said evenly. "She's young and idealistic. She'll realize her mistake soon enough." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You could save everyone a lot of trouble by gracefully bowing out. There's no shame in recognizing when you're outmatched." Harrison felt the familiar weight of inadequacy pressing down, the voice in his head that agreed with everything Daniel said. But he also remembered Clara's hand in his, her voice firm as she defended him, her question about what future he wanted. He thought about how easy it would be to walk away and how much he would regret it. "I appreciate the advice," Harrison said carefully, "but I think I'll let Clara make her own decisions about what she wants." Daniel's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe. But it's my mistake to make." Harrison held the other man's gaze. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to wait for my date to return." He walked away before Daniel could respond, his hands shaking slightly from the confrontation but his head held high. He found a spot near the refreshment table where he could watch the kitchen door and waited. Several long minutes passed before Clara emerged, her expression stormy. She made a direct line for Harrison. "We're leaving." "What happened?" "My mother thinks I should reconsider my choices." "My father sent her to make that clear." Clara's voice vibrated with barely suppressed anger. "Apparently I'm being selfish and short-sighted by entertaining the attentions of someone beneath our social standing. Clara, maybe they have a point." The words cost Harrison something to say, but he forced them out anyway. "Maybe this is too complicated. Or maybe they need to accept that I'm 21 years old and perfectly capable of making my own decisions." Clara took his hand firmly. "Walk me home, Harrison. I've had enough of this dance." They left together, stepping out into the cool night while music and laughter continued behind them. The street lay mostly empty, just scattered lamplight and the distant sounds of celebration. Clara set a brisk pace and Harrison matched it, unsure what to say, unsure if he should say anything at all. They were halfway to the Owens house before Clara finally slowed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have dragged you into my family drama." "You didn't drag me anywhere. I came willingly, remember?" "Still," she sighed. "My parents mean well. They want security for me, want to make sure I'm taken care of. They don't understand that I can take care of myself, that I'd rather build something real with someone genuine than coast on someone else's family money." "Is that what you think this is?" Harrison asked carefully. "Something real." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. They stood beneath a street lamp, its light casting soft shadows across her face. "I don't know yet, but I'd like the chance to find out. Wouldn't you?" Every rational part of Harrison's mind screamed warnings. This could only end badly. The daughter of one of the richest men in the county and a broke ranch hand had no future together. He would end up hurt, publicly humiliated again, maybe worse. But when he looked at Clara, brave and stubborn and choosing him despite everything, rationality seemed less important than the truth of how he felt. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that chance." Clara smiled, genuine and warm. "Good, then we'll figure out the rest as we go." They resumed walking, slower now, their hands naturally finding each other in the space between them. Clara talked about growing up in Redding, about learning to manage ranch accounts because her father never took her seriously, about dreams of traveling someday, but also loving the land she grew up on. Harrison listened more than he spoke, content to learn the contours of her thoughts, the things that mattered to her. The Owens house sat on a hill overlooking the town, larger than any home Harrison had ever been inside. They stopped at the front gate, both reluctant to end the evening despite its rocky moments. "I had a good time tonight," Clara said. "The parts with you anyway. Even though I stepped on your feet twice, even though." She smiled up at him. "Can I see you again? Properly, I mean." "Maybe dinner later this week." Harrison thought about his empty pockets, his lack of anything resembling courting resources. Then he thought about Mrs. Hartwell's words, about people needing help sometimes, about building something real mattering more than showing off wealth. "I'd like that," he said. "Though I should warn you I can't afford fancy restaurants. Good thing I hate fancy restaurants. Clara squeezed his hand. Wednesday evening, there's a little place near the Mercantile that serves decent stew, my treat. I can't let you pay. Harrison Zimmerman, if you argue with me about who pays for dinner, I'm going to start thinking you don't want to see me again. Her tone was light, but her eyes were serious. Let me do this, please. He nodded, overwhelmed by her generosity, by the simple fact that she wanted to spend more time with him. Wednesday evening, I'll be there. Clara rose up on her toes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek, so fast he barely registered it before she pulled away. Good night, Harrison. Thank you for tonight. She disappeared through the gate before he could respond, leaving him standing alone in the lamplight with his cheek tingling and his heart hammering against his ribs. He touched the spot where her lips had been, half convinced he had imagined the whole evening. The walk back to the ranch passed in a daze. Harrison barely noticed the distance, his mind replaying every moment, every word, trying to make sense of how his life had suddenly tilted towards something that felt like hope. The bunkhouse was dark when he arrived, his fellow ranch hands already asleep or still in town celebrating. He undressed carefully, hanging his suit on a nail where it wouldn't wrinkle. Mrs. Hartwell's words echoed in his mind, and he made a silent promise to that second-hand suit that someday, when he had more than pocket change, he would find ways to help others the way he had been helped. Sunday passed in a fog of work and distraction. Tom Fletcher caught him staring off into space while mucking stalls and laughed so hard he nearly fell off a fence rail. Harrison took the ribbing good-naturedly, too caught up in remembering Clara's smile to care about much else. Monday and Tuesday crawled past. Harrison threw himself into work with renewed energy, determined to prove himself worthy of Clara's faith in him, even if only to himself. He mended fences until his hands bled, broke a particularly stubborn young mare to saddle, and volunteered for every difficult task the foreman mentioned. Wednesday arrived with agonizing slowness. Harrison washed up carefully after work, changing into his only clean shirt and hoping Clara wouldn't notice it was the same one he had worn under his suit. He arrived at the small restaurant near the Mercantile 15 minutes early and spent the time pacing outside until Clara appeared. She wore a simple green dress and had pulled her hair back in a practical braid, looking somehow more beautiful than she had at the dance. Her face lit up when she saw him, and Harrison felt something in his chest settle into place, like finding something he hadn't known he was looking for. Dinner was simple stew and fresh bread, better than the bunkhouse food Harrison was used to, but nothing elaborate. They talked easily, the awkwardness of their first evening together burned away by shared experience. Clara asked about his work, seemed genuinely interested in the details of horse training and ranch management. Harrison asked about her role at her family's ranch, and she opened up about the challenges of getting her father to take her contributions seriously. He thinks I'm playing at it, Clara said, breaking off a piece of bread with more force than necessary. Like keeping the books is some kind of hobby instead of real work. Never mind that I've found 3 errors in the past year that saved him significant money. Sounds frustrating. It is. But it also taught me that I'm good at this, that I don't need permission to be competent. She met his eyes across the table. My mother thinks I should focus on finding a husband and managing a household. My father thinks I should defer to men who supposedly know better. Neither of them seems to understand that I want both, a partnership where I'm valued for my skills, not just tolerated. That seems reasonable, Harrison said carefully. Does it? Because most of the men I've met in this county think a woman's value begins and ends with how well she can host dinner parties and produce heirs. Clara's frustration was clear. Daniel Morrison actually told me once that I wouldn't need to worry about business matters after we married because he would handle everything. Like I should be grateful to have decisions taken off my hands. For what it's worth, I think you're smart to want more than that. Harrison meant it. You're clearly capable. Seems a waste to pretend otherwise just to make someone comfortable. Clara's expression softened. Thank you for saying that. You have no idea how rare that attitude is. They talked until the restaurant owner gently suggested they might want to continue their conversation elsewhere as he needed to close up. Harrison walked Clara home again, the route becoming familiar, the ease between them growing with each shared moment. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Harrison would meet Clara after her work at her father's ranch office, and they would walk together, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they ate at the simple restaurant. Sometimes they just walked the streets of Reading or sat by the creek that ran through town. Clara insisted on paying more often than not, arguing that she had access to money, and he needed to save his meager wages. I'm trying to build something, she explained when Harrison protested. A real connection with someone who sees me as a person, not a trophy or a broodmare. That's worth more to me than a few dollars for dinner. Please let me invest in this. So Harrison swallowed his pride and accepted, even as he squirreled away every penny he could spare, determined that someday he would be able to court her properly, to offer her something more than just his company and his worn-out dreams. Not everyone approved of their growing attachment. Richard Owens made his disapproval clear at every opportunity, though he stopped short of forbidding Clara from seeing Harrison. Margaret Owens maintained polite distance, treating Harrison with careful courtesy that somehow felt colder than outright hostility. Daniel Morrison continued to appear at inconvenient moments, always with some pointed comment about Clara's future or Harrison's lack thereof. But none of it seemed to shake Clara's determination. If anything, the opposition made her more stubborn, more openly affectionate, more willing to be seen with Harrison around town regardless of what people might say. My father cornered me again this morning, Clara mentioned one evening as they sat by the creek in late October. Gave me a whole speech about security and social standing and throwing away my future. What did you say? Harrison asked, trailing his fingers in the cool water. I told him my future is mine to throw away if I choose. Clara leaned against his shoulder, a casualness to her affection now that made Harrison's heart ache. Though I also pointed out that I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing something different than what he wants. That's not the same thing. Does he see the difference? Not yet, but he will. Clara picked up a small stone and tossed it into the creek, watching ripples spread across the surface. My mother is actually more reasonable in her way. She pulled me aside yesterday and said if I was truly serious about you, I should be prepared for a harder life than I'm used to. Harrison felt his chest tighten. She's not wrong, maybe not, but hard doesn't mean bad and easy doesn't mean good. Clara turned to look at him directly. Harrison, I need to know something. Where do you see this going? Because I'm investing a lot of emotional energy and taking a lot of grief from my family, and I need to know if you're as serious about this as I am. The question deserved honesty. Harrison took a breath and tried to organize his thoughts into something coherent. When I first came to California, I was just trying to get as far from Tennessee as possible, he said slowly. Put enough distance between me and that humiliation that maybe I could pretend to be someone different. But I'm learning that you can't outrun yourself. The shame just follows along. Clara waited, patient as always. Then you walked into that mercantile and asked me to a dance, and for the first time in years I felt like maybe I could be someone worth something. Harrison turned to meet her eyes. You scare me, Clara. Not because of who you are, but because of how much I want this, how much I want you. Every instinct I have says I'm going to mess this up, that I'm not enough, that your father is right to disapprove. But, Clara prompted gently, but I can't seem to make myself walk away. Harrison reached for her hand. I think about you constantly. I'm working harder than I ever have, saving every penny, trying to build towards something that could be a real future. I want to have something to offer you, Clara, not just now, but years from now. I want to prove to you and to myself and to your father that I'm worth the chance you're taking on me. You don't have to prove anything to my father, Clara said firmly, or to me, honestly. I already see who you are, maybe, but I need to prove it to myself. Harrison squeezed her hand. I'm serious about this, about you. More serious than I've been about anything in my life. That answer your question? Clara smiled, bright and genuine. That answers my question. And for the record, I'm serious too. Seriously enough that I've been putting money aside. Harrison blinked. For what? For land. There's a parcel about 5 miles from town, small but decent, that the owner is willing to sell cheap because it needs work. Good water access, enough space for horses. She watched his face carefully. I've been thinking that might be a worthwhile investment. Clara, I can't let you buy land for me. I wasn't planning to buy it for you. I was planning to buy it for us. She said it casually, but Harrison heard the weight beneath the words. Assuming that's something you might be interested in. Down the line, I mean, no pressure. Harrison's throat felt tight. You're talking about a future together. A real future. I'm talking about possibilities, Clara corrected, but her eyes held certainty. Things I've been thinking about, things that might be nice to build toward. They sat in silence for a long moment, the enormity of the conversation settling around them. Harrison thought about that parcel of land, about building something with his own hands, about Clara beside him not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a genuine partner. The dream felt dangerously tangible. That's something I might be very interested in, he said finally. Down the line. Clara's smile could have lit up the entire valley. She leaned in and kissed him, properly this time, and Harrison forgot to worry about worthiness or social standing or anything except the perfect reality of this moment, this woman, this improbable hope. The weeks blurred into months. Autumn gave way to the mild California winter, and Harrison's savings account grew with agonizing slowness. He took every extra shift offered, volunteered for the hardest jobs, and lived as frugally as possible. Tom Fletcher watched his determination with approval, and occasionally slipped him leads on horse training opportunities that could earn extra money. Clara continued managing her father's books and quietly setting aside funds for the land she had mentioned. Richard Owens's disapproval never softened, but it evolved into a kind of resigned frustration, as if he had accepted that his daughter would make her own mistakes despite his better judgment. In February, Harrison received an unexpected opportunity. A neighboring rancher needed someone to break and train 6 young horses, willing to pay well for quality work. Harrison took the job, spending his evenings and days off working with the horses, applying everything he had learned over years of trial and error. The rancher was impressed enough to recommend Harrison to others, and suddenly he had a reputation as someone skilled with difficult animals. "You're good at this," Clara observed one Sunday afternoon, watching Harrison work with a particularly skittish mare. "Really good. People are noticing." "It's just basic training," Harrison said, but he felt pleased nonetheless. "It's more than that. You have patience and instinct. That mare was considered untrainable by her owner, and look at her now." Clara leaned on the fence rail. "You could build a real business with this skill." "That's the plan. Eventually." Harrison ran his hand along the mare's neck, rewarding her calm response. Few more years of saving, maybe I'll have enough for a down payment on that land you mentioned, or we could do it sooner." Clara's voice held something Harrison couldn't quite identify. "If we were serious about building something together, officially." Harrison went still, his hand frozen on the mare's neck. He turned slowly to look at Clara, trying to read her expression. "How officially are we talking?" he asked carefully. Clara met his eyes directly. "I'm talking about marriage, Harrison. I'm talking about you and me buying that land together, building a life together, doing this properly instead of dancing around it." His heart hammered so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. "Clara, I don't even have a ring. I haven't asked your father's permission. I can't propose to you like this." "Why not? We already know how we feel. We're already planning a future together." Clara climbed over the fence rail to stand beside him. "My father's permission isn't required, and I don't need a ring to know I want to marry you. People will talk. People are already talking. Let them." She took his hands, horse training forgotten. "Harrison, I love you. I've loved you since you showed up to that dance in a second-hand suit you bought with your last dollar, because you gave your word you would be there. I love your honesty and your work ethic, and the way you treat everyone with respect regardless of who they are. I love how you look at me like I'm someone precious, and I'm tired of waiting for the perfect moment that might never come. So I'm asking you, right here and now, will you marry me?" Harrison stared at her, this brave, stubborn woman who had turned his entire life sideways, who had seen worth in him when he could barely see it himself. He thought about all the reasons he should say no, should insist on doing this properly with permission, and a ring and enough money to feel worthy. Then he thought about how none of those things mattered compared to the simple truth that he loved her desperately and completely. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Clara Owens, yes, I'll marry you." She laughed and threw her arms around his neck, and Harrison held her tight, his face pressed into her hair, trying to convince himself this was real. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "Your father is going to lose his mind," Harrison said. "Probably, but he'll get over it eventually." Clara's confidence was unshakable. "My mother will come around faster. She just wants me to be happy, even if she thinks I'm going about it the wrong way." They married quietly in late March, a simple ceremony at the small church with only a handful of witnesses. Tom Fletcher stood up for Harrison. Clara's mother attended with pursed lips and worried eyes, though she hugged Clara afterward and told Harrison to take good care of her daughter. Richard Owens refused to come, his absence a statement that hurt even though they had expected it. "He'll regret this someday," Margaret said quietly as she prepared to leave. "When he has grandchildren, he doesn't know because of his pride." But his disapproval couldn't touch the joy Harrison felt watching Clara walk toward him in a simple white dress, her face radiant with certainty. They exchanged vows in steady voices, and when the minister pronounced them married, Harrison kissed his wife with a fierce gratitude that this was his life now, that Clara had chosen him and kept choosing him despite everything. They bought the land that spring with combined savings, 5 acres of scrubby hillside property that needed serious work, but had good bones. Harrison built their first structure, a small barn for the horses he planned to train. Clara managed their finances with the same skill she had applied to her father's books, stretching every dollar and making smart decisions about priorities. The first year was hard, harder than Harrison had expected, even knowing it would be difficult. They lived in a tent while he built their house board by board, working dawn to dark between training horses and doing occasional ranch work for guaranteed income. Clara took in sewing and continued managing accounts for several local businesses, her skills in demand once word spread of her competence. Some people in town treated them with open disdain, whispering about the girl who had thrown away her family's wealth for a nobody. Others watched with curiosity, waiting to see if the improbable marriage would last. A few, like Mrs. Hartwell and Tom Fletcher, offered quiet support, help that came without judgment. Richard Owens maintained his distance for nearly a year. Then one afternoon in late winter, Harrison looked up from training a client's horse to find Clara's father standing at the edge of their property, taking in the small house Harrison had built, the neat barn, the corrals where horses moved calmly under Harrison's guidance. "Mr. Owens," Harrison said carefully, approaching the fence. "Can I help you with something?" Richard studied him in silence for a long moment. "My wife says you're treating Clara well." "I'm doing my best, sir. Margaret also says Clara's happy, happier than she's seen her in years." Richard's jaw worked like the words cost him something. "Says you work hard, don't drink, don't gamble, don't mistreat her." Harrison waited, unsure where this was heading. "I came here to tell you I was right," Richard said finally. "That you weren't good enough for my daughter and this whole venture would end in failure and hardship." "Yes, sir." Harrison kept his voice neutral. "But standing here, seeing what you've built in less than a year, I'm having trouble making that argument stick." Richard turned his gaze to Harrison. "You've surprised me, Zimmerman. I didn't think you had it in you." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close enough that Harrison felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. "I love your daughter, sir. She believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. I'm spending the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that faith." Richard nodded slowly. "Clara said something similar, said you were worth 10 Daniel Morrisons." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She might be right about that. Morrison managed to lose half his father's money in a bad railroad investment last month." "I'm sorry to hear that." "I'm not. Boy's an idiot, always has been." Richard straightened his shoulders. "I'm not saying I approve exactly. But Margaret wants to see her daughter, and I'm tired of being the obstacle. So I suppose what I'm saying is you're welcome at our house for Sunday dinner if you and Clara are interested." The olive branch was awkwardly extended, but Harrison recognized it for the significant gesture it was. "We'd like that, sir. Thank you." Richard nodded once more and left, and when Harrison told Clara about the conversation that evening, she cried and hugged him and said maybe her father wasn't quite as stubborn as she had thought. The years that followed were full of hard work and slow, steady growth. Harrison's reputation as a horse trainer expanded beyond Reading, bringing clients from neighboring towns and counties. Clara managed their business with sharp intelligence, negotiating fair prices and keeping their finances stable even through lean seasons. They added to their land bit by bit, purchasing adjacent parcels when they became available. Richard Owens never became warm exactly, but he softened into gruff respect. He occasionally sent business Harrison's way, ranch owners who needed horses trained and were willing to pay well. Margaret visited regularly, bringing food and companionship for Clara, slowly building a relationship with Harrison based on his obvious devotion to her daughter. In the spring of their 3rd year married, Clara told Harrison she was pregnant. He had been working in the barn when she appeared with the news, and his hands shook so badly he had to set down his tools before he dropped them. They stood together in the afternoon light streaming through the barn doors, holding each other while the enormity of creating a new life together settled around them like a blessing. Odette was born in January during a cold snap that frosted the windows and turned the ground hard. She came into the world screaming her displeasure at the temperature, a tiny furious bundle with Clara's dark hair and Harrison's stubborn chin. Harrison held his daughter with shaking hands, terrified he would break her, overwhelmed by the fierce protective love that roared through him. "She's perfect," Clara said from the bed, exhausted but smiling. "Look at what we made." Harrison couldn't speak past the emotion clogging his throat, so he just nodded and pressed a kiss to Odette's impossibly small forehead. 2 years later, Emmett arrived with less drama, a calm baby who seemed content to observe the world with serious eyes. Where Odette was all fierce energy and demands, Emmett was patient and thoughtful, even as an infant. "They balance each other," Tom Fletcher observed, watching the children play while he and Harrison mended a fence. "Like you and Clara." Harrison smiled at that, at the idea that he and Clara had achieved balance. It felt true. She pushed him to take chances, to believe in possibilities. He grounded her, reminded her to be practical, to build slow and steady. Together they had created something far more substantial than either could have managed alone. The children grew, and the horse operation grew with them. Harrison built a reputation for integrity and skill, turning down easy money from clients who mistreated animals, earning loyalty from those who valued his ethical approach. Clara expanded their business to include breeding, carefully selecting bloodlines, and managing the complicated logistics of a growing operation. One evening, perhaps 7 years after that harvest dance, Harrison stood on the porch of the house he had built, watching sunset paint the valley in gold and amber. Odette and Emmett played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Clara sat on the porch steps going over accounts, her hair now worn in a practical knot, her hands ink-stained from bookkeeping. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked quietly. "Choosing this life instead of the easier one you could have had?" Clara looked up from her ledgers, surprised by the question. "Not once, not even for a moment. You could have had comfort, security, a place in society. I have comfort and security. I have a place in a society I built with you." She set down her pen and rose to stand beside him. "Harrison, I've never been happier than I am right now, watching our children play in the yard of a house you built, working on a business we created together. Why would I regret any of it? Your father still thinks you settled for less than you deserved." "My father is slowly learning that worth isn't measured in bank accounts." Clara leaned against his side. "He admitted last week that Emmett is the smartest grandchild he's got, and that Odette reminds him of me at that age. That's progress." Harrison wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I still have that suit, you know, the one I bought for the dance. I know, I've seen it in the trunk. I kept it to remind myself where we started, how much of a chance you took on me when you had no good reason to." Harrison pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Best dollar I ever spent buying that suit. Best question I ever asked inviting you to that dance." Clara tilted her face up to his. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being brave enough to try. Thank you for seeing something in me worth taking a chance on." They stood together as the sun finished its descent, painting the sky in shades of purple and deep blue, while their children played and the horses moved peacefully in the corrals, and the life they had built together settled around them like a benediction. Harrison thought about the boy he had been, broken and ashamed, certain he would never be enough for anyone worth having. And he thought about the man he had become, still flawed but building something good, loved fiercely by a woman who had looked past his empty pockets and seen his worth. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Drought came one summer, testing their resilience, but they weathered it through careful planning and Clara's financial management. A barn fire threatened everything they had built, but the community that had once looked down on their marriage came together to help rebuild. And Harrison learned that respect had to be earned, but once given was enduring. Odette grew into a fierce girl who loved horses with her father's passion and managed numbers with her mother's skill. Emmett developed a quiet strength, thoughtful and steady, the kind of person people instinctively trusted. Harrison taught both children to work hard, treat people fairly, measure worth by character instead of possessions. Richard Owens softened further with age, spending Sunday afternoons teaching Emmett about business while arguing with Odette about whether girls needed to learn such things. Arguments Odette always won with her mother's logic and her grandfather's stubborn determination. Margaret became a constant presence in their lives, doting grandmother who brought cookies and wisdom in equal measure. On the 10th anniversary of that harvest dance, Clara surprised Harrison with a party. Not a large gathering, just Tom Fletcher and the other ranch hands who had become friends, Mrs. Hartwell from the second-hand shop, a few of the clients whose horses Harrison had trained, Clara's parents and the children. They gathered in the yard as sunset approached, sharing food and stories, celebrating not just a decade of marriage but everything they had built together. Speech, someone called, and Harrison found himself standing reluctantly, Clara beside him, trying to find words adequate to the moment. 10 years ago, I was a broke ranch hand with nothing to offer but hard work and hope, he began. Then Clara walked into a mercantile and asked me to a dance, and my whole life changed. She saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. She took a chance nobody else would have taken. And every day since, I've tried to be worthy of that faith. He turned to look at Clara, his brave, stubborn, brilliant wife who had built this life beside him. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful for it every single day. Thank you for asking me to that dance. Thank you for saying yes when I proposed back. Thank you for building this beautiful, complicated life with me. Clara's eyes shone with tears, and she pulled him down for a kiss while their friends cheered, and their children made disgusted faces, and Harrison felt the full, overwhelming weight of being exactly where he was meant to be. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Harrison and Clara sat together on their porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, content and peaceful. "You remember what you told me that first night?" she asked. "After the dance, when my father confronted us. I remember thinking I was going to lose you before I ever really had you," Harrison said. "You told me you wanted a place of your own someday, land for horses, something you built with your own hands, someone to share it with who saw you as enough." Clara gestured to the property around them, the house and barn and corrals, the family they had created. "You got all of that, Harrison. You built exactly the future you dreamed about." "We built it," Harrison corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Partners," Clara agreed. "In everything." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind of peace that comes from years of shared work and mutual respect. Harrison thought about that second-hand suit still folded carefully in their trunk, about the boy who had spent his last dollar on it, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. That boy had taken the biggest chance of his life, had chosen to be brave for just long enough to say yes to an impossible invitation. And in saying yes, he had found everything he never knew he needed. A home built by his own hands, work that challenged and fulfilled him. Children who looked at him like he hung the moon, and Clara, always Clara, his partner and champion and the best decision he had ever made. "I love you," he said quietly, the words inadequate but true. "I love you too," Clara replied, "now and always." The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent to human joy and struggle, but Harrison barely noticed them. He was too busy being grateful for this moment, this life, this woman beside him who had seen worth where others saw nothing, who had asked him to dance and changed everything. The years would continue to unfold ahead of them, full of moments both ordinary and extraordinary. There would be challenges and triumphs, sorrows and celebrations, the endless, beautiful, complicated work of building a life together. But sitting there on the porch of the house he had built, with Clara warm against his side and their children sleeping safe inside, Harrison knew with absolute certainty that he had been wrong all those years ago in Tennessee. He was enough. He had always been enough. It had just taken one brave woman asking him to a dance to help him finally believe it.